A war without a declaration. A peace without an agreement. A region bristling with nukes, borders, and buried grudges now drifting closer than ever to a point of no return. Why is South Asia, a region that once boasted about being the cradle of non-alignment, now on the verge of a full-blown naval conflict? And how is this localized tension subtly entangled with the power plays of Moscow, Washington, and Beijing? Before we dive into the commentary, please like and subscribe to Worldview Today, so you won't miss our unique takes on global current affairs. In early May 2025, while much of the world's attention was drawn to fragile ceasefires in Eastern Europe and new tariffs rippling through Geneva, the Indian Navy quietly made a thunderous move. A full-scale deployment into the North Arabian Sea aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines, and naval air squadrons, all repositioned like chess pieces to surround a checkmated adversary. The intended message to Pakistan was clear: this isn't a drill. This is deterrence by domination. The trigger was a deadly terrorist attack in Pahalgam, Kashmir, which left 26 tourists dead. The group responsible was allegedly linked to Lashkar-e-Taiba, a name infamous across intelligence circles and internationally condemned for decades. And in New Delhi, patience already paper-thin snapped. What followed was swift. Within 96 hours, the Indian Navy launched long-range strike drills. Supersonic BrahMos cruise missiles were fired from Visakhapatnam-class and Talwar-class destroyers. The act wasn't just military theater. It was a show of strategic depth. The Navy even publicly stated their forward presence would remain on high alert, with orders to strike designated sea and land targets if necessary. But beyond the tactical display lies something more unsettling. Both India and Pakistan are nuclear-armed states. Both have contested the same territory since 1947, and both are now simulating war at sea simultaneously within their overlapping exclusive economic zones. The danger isn't in an outright declaration. It's in the noise, the fog, the split-second misread. That's how regional flare-ups become continental crises. And this is no isolated escalation, because while Indian warships sail the Arabian waters across the Eurasian landmass, another message is being crafted, this time by Russia's Vladimir Putin. According to reports from The Times, Putin is preparing to present Ukraine with a brutal ultimatum during a high-profile meeting in Istanbul: full surrender. Among the demands are regime change in Kyiv, complete NATO renunciation, and territorial concessions that include not just Crimea, but Donetsk, Luhansk, and even newly claimed regions like Zaporizhia. The Kremlin's reasoning. Military facts on the ground. Moscow claims the current battlefield reality must be the starting point for any negotiation, not the pre-war status quo. Meanwhile, President Zelensky, under pressure both domestically and from Western capitals, insists on a 30-day ceasefire, an offer Moscow rejected outright. What we are witnessing here is more than a deadlocked war. It's a diplomatic paradox. Both sides claim openness to dialogue, but only on terms the other would never accept. Putin won't blink unless NATO withdraws its support. Zelensky won't budge unless Russia pulls out. And yet whisper networks suggest back-channel talks, possibly in Saudi Arabia or Qatar, have been ongoing for years. 3 years to be exact, if the Ukrainian MP Oleksiy Honcharenko is to be believed. And this raises a vital question: if quiet diplomacy has been alive all this time, who benefits from keeping it quiet? Washington's position is also in flux. Under Trump's leadership, the message is different. Unlike Biden's more confrontational posture, Trump has urged both Ukraine and Russia to make mutual concessions. His recent call just 1 hour before Zelensky agreed to meet Putin in Istanbul was no coincidence, it was choreography. Trump, it seems, aims to reshape global conflict resolution under a banner of transactional realism. No idealism, just results. Simultaneously, U.S. military preparations in the Pacific are accelerating. At Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, Japan, just 370 miles from Taiwan, U.S. Air Force units ran high-intensity combat readiness drills. F-35A stealth fighters from Alaska were deployed under the Agile Combat Employment Doctrine, simulating rapid launches from hardened, unpredictable locations. The message to Beijing: you may be watching us, but you will never pin us down. Chinese missile inventories have surged from 1,000 to 1,300 units in recent years, many with a range of 1,864 miles. Almost every U.S. base in Japan now lies within that range. So the Pentagon is shifting from strength in place to strength in motion. Engineers at Kadena even practiced rapid runway repair operation scenarios where missile damage is identified and patched within hours using real-time aerial surveillance. The Hudson Institute has warned of a Chinese first strike strategy meant to decapitate U.S. air capabilities on the ground. Kadena's drills are a direct rebuttal to that nightmare scenario. But the global chessboard isn't just filled with kings and missiles. Sometimes the biggest moves are quiet, like the recent dissolution of the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, after 40 years of armed struggle against Turkey. During its 12th Congress, the organization announced it would disband and embrace disarmament. Abdullah Öcalan, the group's imprisoned founder, had reportedly urged this move since February. Whether this signals a lasting peace or simply a tactical pause remains unclear. But for Ankara, it's a milestone. And as the dust settles in Anatolia, a different storm brews in the South China Sea. China, as if on cue, announced a scientific breakthrough not in the skies or the seas, but in the very heart of the planet's climate system, the oceans. In a move widely interpreted as a challenge to Western technological dominance, Beijing unveiled LCOM, the most advanced ocean simulation model ever created, boasting an unprecedented resolution of 1 kilometer. That's not just a scientific milestone, that's geostrategic positioning. Developed by the Chinese Academy of Sciences amid ongoing U.S. semiconductor export restrictions, LCOM is more than a scientific tool. It's a statement. A declaration that even under a tech blockade, China is not retreating. It's adapting, optimizing, and reconfiguring its algorithms to bypass the Western bottleneck. In Beijing's narrative, this isn't just resilience, it's sovereignty, and the implications run deep. Oceans absorb over 90% of the Earth's heat from global warming, and more than 30% of the carbon dioxide produced by human activity. They shape typhoons, droughts, floods, and famine. Control the data flow of the oceans, and you control predictive power over every major weather and climate decision on the planet. For a China increasingly sidelined in Western-led climate talks, especially after the U.S. walked away from the Paris Agreement and the World Health Organization, this model offers more than scientific prestige. It grants leverage. It enables Beijing to forecast better, faster, and arguably more independently than its Western peers. And with extreme weather events rising globally, the power to predict is the power to lead. But leadership isn't declared, it's earned. And while China fine-tunes climate data models, the U.S. and China quietly made a different kind of deal, one far more immediate in its impact. In Geneva, after months of economic brinkmanship, both sides agreed to slash mutual tariffs by over 100 basis points, bringing them back to a baseline of 10%. A sudden thaw in a frozen trade war that had paralyzed over $600 billion in two-way commerce. The timing was no accident. With Trump reinstated in the White House and reactivating his trademark tariff policies, Beijing's room for maneuver was shrinking fast. U.S. tariffs under Trump have ballooned to 145% on key Chinese imports, effectively serving as an economic quarantine. China retaliated with a 125% hike of its own and severe curbs on rare earth exports. But neither side wants decoupling. Not really. Not now. That's why the Geneva handshake mattered. Treasury Secretary Scott Benn and Trade Representative Jameer Sonre both emphasized one shared priority. We want trade, not blockades. But this fragile pause has an expiration date 90 days. That's not a resolution. It's a countdown. Markets responded with the exuberance of a gambler who just won a reprieve, not a fortune. The dollar strengthened. Futures surged. But beneath the euphoria, the underlying tensions remain. Trump's re-election isn't just a return to tariffs. It's a return to conditional cooperation, where allies and rivals alike are forced to negotiate from a position of asymmetry. And that asymmetry is now shaping other fault lines. In Bangladesh, where political earthquakes have toppled the long-dominant Awami League, the new interim government led by Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus has labeled the former ruling party a terrorist organization. Using a revised ICT law, they've banned the party entirely, citing human rights abuses, economic corruption, and incitement of deadly protests. The crackdown may have been driven by a quest for justice, but the optics are complex. Awami League's student wing had already been accused of orchestrating violence, and the former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, now in exile in India, remains a polarizing figure. Whether this is accountability or political cleansing depends on who you ask. But Bangladesh is no longer just a domestic concern. It's a strategic node in the Indo-Pacific, courted by China, supported by India, and observed closely by the U.S. With elections delayed until 2026, the interim regime now has a long runway and a short leash from the international community. The pressure to reform is matched only by the risk of overreach. Meanwhile, back in South Asia's high-stakes chessboard, the skies are reopening. 32 airports across northern India previously shut down due to clashes with Pakistan have resumed operations. This follows India's Operation Sindoor, which included surgical strikes against alleged terrorist bases across the line of control. In response, Pakistan launched drone and missile attacks on Indian military sites, attacks that were intercepted but not ignored. Flight trackers showed dramatic airspace reroutes during the exchange. Civilian aviation was suspended not because of technical limitations, but because of strategic uncertainty. That pause, too, was a signal this was no longer a hypothetical conflict. And yet, even in the shadow of missiles and lockdowns, diplomacy stirs. Pakistan and India, despite history, despite ideology, now face the same nuclear logic. Escalation is cheap, but de-escalation is priceless. And while both sides return to the skies, neither can afford a misstep on the ground. What's perhaps most surreal is how all of this, the border standoffs, the energy realignments, the trade truces, the information wars, is playing out simultaneously. As if the world is no longer a stage of discrete events, but a single unfolding narrative. A geopolitical opera with overlapping acts and clashing soundtracks. And just when you think the plot can't twist further, Afghanistan makes headlines. The Taliban, still governing with an iron fist cloaked in scripture, has now banned chess. Yes, chess. Officially for being contrary to Islamic law and akin to gambling. But unofficially, the move signals something deeper: control over leisure, over imagination, over abstract thought. This isn't about pawns and queens. It's about ideology. It's about shaping a future where even symbolic strategy is forbidden unless it serves the state. Under Taliban rule, traditional games like buzkashi thrive, but cognitive sports vanish. The message is subtle yet terrifying. We approve of your instincts, not your intellect. While the Taliban crushes creativity under the guise of religious purity in Bolivia, a very different spectacle unfolds, one that celebrates music, memory, and identity. Over 3,000 Bolivians gathered in La Paz last weekend to perform a traditional Andean musical form called tacatha, playing handmade flutes in unison. It wasn't just a cultural celebration, it was a quiet rebellion against erasure. A statement that even in the age of AI and algorithmic dominance, some voices still rise from ancient wood and human breath. For Bolivia, this event was about more than setting a world record. It was about reasserting the place of indigenous cultures in the global narrative. Melanie Coronel, one of the participants, described the moment as historic, not just because she was a woman playing an instrument once reserved for men, but because she was reclaiming something older than the nation-state itself. In a time when most headlines scream of division, here was a moment of unity built not on politics but on tone and rhythm. But not all rhythms are harmonious. In Hong Kong, a city once praised for its efficiency and resilience, a silent crisis is spreading across its youth, depression, self-harm, and suicide. A recent survey of over 2,600 students across 15 secondary schools found that nearly one-third had contemplated self-harm or suicide during the academic year. Nearly 45% reported feelings of self-loathing, and a staggering number of those struggling were senior students pressured by exams, parents, and a future that no longer feels theirs. The problem isn't new, but it is worsening. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, school closures have cut off many teens from the only support systems they had: teachers, peers, structured routines. While online mental health resources exist, they often lack cultural nuanced trust and accessibility. For students spiraling under expectations, those digital lifelines may as well be mirages. The Hong Kong government has introduced a 3-tier intervention system to identify at-risk students early and direct them to specialist care. But a system is only as strong as its foundation. Without a cultural shift that prioritizes emotional literacy as much as academic success, these efforts will remain reactive, not preventive. And that, in a way, is the global pattern we are seeing. From Delhi to Damascus, from Istanbul to Geneva, governments are reacting sometimes decisively, sometimes desperately to crises they barely understand. But very few are planning upstream. Very few are addressing the roots. Consider Poland, where the latest escalation in its diplomatic row with Russia involves the forced closure of a Russian consulate in Krakow. The justification: an alleged Russian operation to sabotage a major shopping center in Warsaw, a center heavily operated by ethnic Vietnamese vendors. The details are murky. No casualties, but enormous financial loss. And the response from Moscow predictably furious. Zakharova, the Russian Foreign Ministry's iron tongue, labeled the move irrational and vindictive. Retaliation is expected. Likely a Polish consulate in Kaliningrad will be next. This is hybrid warfare, no longer just about missiles or trade, but memory symbols, suspicion. A fire in a marketplace. A consulate shuttered. A narrative weaponized. For Russia, every diplomatic closure is both a setback and a signal. For Poland, every escalation is both a risk and a reaffirmation: we are not your vassal. But if you zoom out, the symmetry becomes clearer. India and Pakistan flexing muscle at sea. Ukraine and Russia bargaining with threats. China investing in weather models while trading tariff blows. The U.S. building deterrence with stealth jets and executive orders. Even Donald Trump's domestic battles have global implications. His May 12th announcement to sign an executive order slashing drug prices by up to 80% wasn't just populism. It was a shot across the bow of big pharma international patent regimes and the entire architecture of drug pricing. Under his plan, the U.S. would adopt a most favored nation pricing structure, paying no more than the lowest price charged in any other developed country. That would kneecap pharmaceutical profits domestically and ripple into global supply chains. Industry groups cried foul immediately. The Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, PHRMA, argued that this move would destabilize innovation and patient access. Trump countered by accusing them of profiteering, reminding the public that some of these same companies had funded his inauguration. The irony was not lost. This time he promised he would not back down. Why does this matter globally? Because American drug prices set benchmarks for global pricing strategies. If the U.S. rewrites the formula, every nation that negotiates generics, imports biologics, or budgets for public health will feel the shift. In that sense, drug prices aren't just an economic issue. They are a diplomatic weapon. And speaking of diplomatic weapons, a final, almost surreal headline came from Ukraine. A member of its own parliament, Oleksiy Honcharenko, admitted that high-level representatives from Kyiv and Moscow have been holding secret negotiations for 3 years. Quiet talks in Arab states. Even while public declarations insisted on zero dialogue. If true, this revelation unravels the entire fabric of Ukraine's diplomatic posture. Since 2022, President Zelensky has insisted there can be no negotiations until Russia withdraws completely. Yet these back channels, if verified, suggest that the real game is always being played behind a different curtain. It also reveals something else, that even amid war negotiation never truly dies. It just goes underground. And maybe that's the point of this entire moment in global politics. The real battles aren't the ones with explosions. They're the ones with silence, behind closed doors, at border crossings, in computer models, in pharmaceutical contracts, in school hallways where teenagers battle demons no one sees. The world isn't heading toward a singular crisis. It's already in a constellation of them. Economic, psychological, environmental, ideological. Some are exploding, others are eroding. The only question is, do we still know which ones are real? If you value this perspective, consider subscribing to Worldview today and sharing it with someone who still believes in critical thinking.